Welcome to Sacred Matrix, a divine paradigm of love and universal consciousness, with your host, Janet Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Together, we transform the world.
And now, here are your hosts, Janet and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Hi, can you hear me? Aloha, can you hear me? Huh.
Aloha?
I can hear you. I can't hear Deborah, and I don't know if we're live on air. Okay, you can hear me now. Okay, thank you. So, Richard, I'm sorry, I did an intro. I'm not sure if anybody heard it or got recorded. But basically, I was telling everybody who you are and who we are. We're the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio. Janet Lessin and Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin, and producer Deborah DeFranco. And so, Richard, would you like to tell us a little bit? I was doing a recap, and it's better if you tell us in your words, who are you? And I did tell the listeners we covered the first 14 years, but you can kind of recap what happened, and we're going to go from age 15 is the next episode we're going to cover. Go ahead,
right.
Richard. Take it away.
So you want an overview of the first 14 first? Is that what you're asking, or you want me just to continue, or what?
Just an overview.
All right. Anyway, my name is Dr. Richard Knight. I have basically been a theologian and religious researcher and a paranormal researcher and a metaphysician basically all of my life. I came into this world with complete connection to Source, which means that basically I knew who I was and where I came from and where I had most recently been. I was born with 14 senses, which means that I had the equivalent of a psychic sense to each of our regular 5, plus additional other gifts such as levitation, teleportation, invisibility, and things of this nature. So anyway, being gifted in this way made me very separate. I faced a lot of very stern rejection early on. As a matter of fact, my mother even tried to drown me at the age of 6 months because when she looked upon my face, she saw the man that she had had an affair with that had created me in the first place, and she wanted no part of him. Fortunately for me, the goddess of the sea picked me up off the waves and deposited me back into my mother's arms. And then in turn, she had a mental breakdown about 3 months later, and my grandparents put me into foster care. And the foster care was a Spanish family, and I was competing with 6 chihuahuas for the attention and the love of the family. Fortunately, this only lasted a couple of years, and I was reunited with my mum. And basically, she had come out of the institution, and my grandparents, of course, didn't like the situation because they were both Roman Catholic. May they rest in peace, because they're both departed and have been for some time. Anyway, so they in turn decided that the best interest of me was to board me in a Catholic boarding school. And so I attended Catholic boarding school basically from about the age 4.5 to the age of 7, during which time they absolutely were convinced that I was the son of the devil because, I had all kinds of paranormal and supernatural gifts. And instead of seeing them as possibly being divine or coming from the Holy Spirit, they just decided that there was too many of them and that obviously I must be the work of the devil. So their reaction was to isolate me from the other children and basically set me off into a library which had hundreds or maybe even thousands of books. And so that's the majority of the way that I would spend my time during the day. At age 5, I was abducted into an alien starship. I was swinging on a swing out in the play yard, and basically I was swinging up, and as I swung up, all of a sudden this huge bright light came out of nowhere, and I felt myself pulled into the light, and the next thing I knew I was on a starship of some kind, and I was not alone. There was probably about a good
Uh-oh. Richard, are you still there? Oh, shoot. I'm ready. Well, hopefully we can get Richard back really soon here. Okay, so he was saying how he was abducted by Arcturians when he was 5 years old. And last week he told us all about the details of this abduction, which he was starting to convey right now. I'm not sure what we're going to do to get Richard back. Sasha, would you like to entertain the audience while I
Sure.
get Richard back?
I'd be happy to tell you a little bit about why we call this the sacred matrix. Because it's the idea that everything is part of everything else, and everything is related to everything else, and it's a matrix. There's nothing to escape from, because everything is a part of you and you're a part of everything. And so what the sacred matrix is, it's about realizing that the whole determines the parts, and the parts determine the whole, and they're all fractals of each other, and everything is you and you are it, and that's what the sacred matrix is. I thought I'd rap a little bit about that to fill in time while Janet does technical things.
And I'm still not done. Okay, here, I'm going to try to get Richard back in 1 second. Let's see if we can get him in. Okay, so Deborah is getting Richard back, and he's going to tell us about his life up until he was 14, which is very metaphysical, spiritual, and paranormal life. He has many episodes. And so he's got a very interesting story, and I hope we can get him back in.
Okay, yes. Hello.
There you are, Richard. Okay, you're
Yes.
on board the ship. What happened?
So anyway, I don't know. There were grays, there were greens, and there were blues, and they were all of different form, and they all had different size eyes. And basically, the grays came over and laid me down flat, and I was unconscious for a bit. And evidently, I could feel that they had put something in my nose. I didn't know how they did it. I didn't see them do it. I didn't feel them do it. I only had this awareness that there was something weird going on in my nose. And then the next minute I know I was returned to Earth. And so about, maybe a week later or so.
Richard, let me ask you something about your nose. A lot of the experiencers, myself included, they had sinusitis. They had runny noses since then.
Yeah, I had a terrible. Oops, I'm sorry. I had a terrible. My breathing through my nose had become limited, and yes, I had a lot of runny nose and so forth, just like you were describing.
Yeah. Okay, continue your story.
So anyway, about a week later, I all of a sudden recognized that as they sequestered me back in my usual place, the library, I could read all of the books, and a great many of the books were foreign languages like Polish and Greek and Italian and German and French. And some of them were adventures, and some of them were philosophies, and some of them were religious stories, and just all kind of different things. So then when they came in to see me, I was starting to speak to them in foreign languages, and they're going, well, how can that possibly be? So they sat me down and they tested me and all this, and basically I could speak 14 different languages, and I could read, write, and speak them fluently. So basically they declared that I was a savant of language at that time. So all things are going crazy.
Are you saying that the ETs enhanced made you a universal translator somehow? They enhanced your ability to
I think so. And I think this was done because I think the purpose, I vaguely remember having signed or given some kind of mental permission for a contract of a tracking device being installed, and the tracking device and their state of watching me or whatever would be to measure how people reacted to me and basically how much rejection I received. So I don't know if this enhancement of being able to speak all these languages was a deliberate part of their action, or if in fact it was a natural gift that I had already been born with, and it took that amount of time to develop fully. So either way.
So were you basically being given a hard time because you had these? It sounds like everything happens. People are punishing you kind of for being smarter than them.
You're absolutely correct that I was feared because I was in a Catholic boarding school. So I was dealing with nuns and priests, and I could levitate, and sometimes I'd be levitating myself in the air, and other times I'd be levitating stuffed animals in the air, and other times I'd be floating to the ceiling and looking down on them, and other times, I would be creating fire in the palm of my hands, it's not regular fire, it's what you call spiritual fire. It's a blue-white flame. So it doesn't burn me and it doesn't burn others. It's just a blue-white flame. And it's done as a protective measure, and also, to what you'd call put energetic walls between myself and other individuals. And then, of course, I was also able to, when I would come in contact with the other kids, if they had like scrapes and bruises, I could heal them instantly. I could take away their headaches and all of this kind of stuff. So the more that I could do, or the more that I would do in expressing myself, the more fearful they became of me. And so they basically isolated me completely, and they didn't know how to deal with me. So basically they shoved me upstairs in the library because I could also read minds. So there was no point in putting me in school because I'd automatically know the teacher's thoughts. And if they gave quizzes, I'd also know the answers before the question was asked. So it was just a very, very awkward situation. And fortunately for me,
Now,
go ahead.
I had a quick question. Is that how it is for you still, or did they tone down some of these abilities so you could live a somewhat normal life?
Well, okay. My great-grandmother basically gave me, or taught me basically, how to control these various gifts and so forth. So I myself took control of them over time. And of course, it wasn't so much denial. It was just, like you said, toning them down, or basically kind of putting them on the shelf and only using them as needed as life went on. But of course, at 5 years old, you're a kid and you've got all these different gifts and you're all excited about it and you don't know what to do with them. And that's when my great-grandmother came in. And fortunately, she rescued me and took me away from the boarding school a couple weekends every month. And then in turn, she would school me on our family tradition, which is Druidism. And then eventually, over a few thousand years, as time wore by, they also started to include witchcraft as a part of our practice. And there's a lot of similarities between witchcraft and Druidism, whereas basically there's hardly no similarity whatsoever between Catholicism and Druidism, other than the fact that we believe in a higher power or a divine source of all, or, a God, all-powerful, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway.
What do you know of the Druids? Just a little aside here. Since you had a great-grandmother that was able to teach you, and it's been mostly everybody that knew about Druidism is gone, what did she say? What is Druidism? Who are the Druids? Where are the Druids?
The Druids basically are a nature religious system of spiritual beliefs, and they live in harmony with nature. They live in harmony. They believe in a divine source, a mother and father God, and they also pay attention to the moon, and they also pay attention to the sun, and they use all herbal remedies and anything that nature offers that's natural. And basically, as far as their position in society is concerned, when you come into the major village, they were law keepers and law speakers. So basically, people would come to them like a court of law, and whatever they decided in a matter was final. There was no appeal. There'd usually be 3 druids sitting on benches, more or less, and the people would come before them to ask them to resolve a situation or circumstance, and they would hear the matter before them, and then in turn, basically, they would decide what the decision was in the best interest of all those concerned, and they would do a decree, and basically that was the law. And they were also philosophers, and they were also mineralists, and they were also they taught language. They taught basically in a lot of different respects. They were kind of like a walking, talking school. They would teach literature. They would teach philosophy. They would teach, of course, the inner traditions of magic, the inner traditions of spell work, the inner traditions of alchemy, the inner traditions of all kinds of different things. And that's who they were. They were naturalists that basically lived in harmony with nature and basically lived in harmony with the divine. So that's them in a nutshell. And yes, you're right. There is no information. Why? Because it's purely an oral tradition. Now, of course, in the last 20 years, a good friend of mine has written a couple of books in regards to Druidism, and she's fairly accurate. She doesn't go into all the details, but she gives you enough knowledge that basically you get a better feel for it. And of course, that's been long in coming as well. But anyway.
Wow. Okay, so back to your story. So you're go ahead. Continue where you left off. Sorry.
Okay, well, you have to understand that while all of this is going on, okay, from year 1 to year 5, I'm seeing, hearing, and speaking to spirits, all right? I have the ability to read minds. I can do all kinds of different mental things and all kinds of things dealing with telepathy and all kinds of things dealing with just all kinds of what a lot of people would experience or claim would be magic. Because, in fact, like I said, if I didn't want to be seen, I'd turn invisible. If I didn't want to be perceived, I could mentally project where people would not be able to hear me or see me or anything. In other words, even past just being invisible. In other words, there'd be no sensation energetically wise that I was even in the room. And so this was all of the natural gifts that I was born with, okay? And of course, naturally they were rejected, and that's even though they were never ever shared around my grandmother or my mother. When I went to this Catholic boarding school, I was just developing. At age 5, you're just coming out of your shell, and you've got all these various gifts, and you don't know what to do with them. And that's when great grandmother came along, and she schooled me on everything. And unfortunately, she was only around for a couple of years, because she passed at the age of 103. But she gave me her word that she would teach me through mirrors. Okay, so from age 7 to age 12, she would come to me in mirrors, and she had specifically given me a hand mirror, a round hand mirror that was held by hand, of course. And she would appear to me, and when she appeared to me, I would see her face as though she had been in the form that she was prior to her passing. Okay? So she kept with me, and she counseled me and all this other kind of stuff. And when I'd come into situations, then, of course, she'd give me her advice as to what to do and all this kind of stuff. And she stuck with me that way until age 12. So anyway, I left behind the Catholic boarding school at the age of 7, having been indoctrinated, given First Holy Communion, and doing the little white suit and the white Bible and the rosary and all that good stuff. And basically at the age of 7, they said, look, we're done with this child. We don't know how to control him. We don't understand him. So we're going to give him off over to another school over here, and they can handle it. So on I went to another Christian school. And when I was at the second Christian school at the age of 7, I was sexually abused. All right. And the people there also tied me in a chair and fed me meals with my hands tied to the chair behind my back at times, especially when it was food I didn't want to eat. And other times they would sit me and have me stay in the chair until such time that I'd cleared my plate, having eaten whatever it was on the plate. So I thought this was all kind of cruel. Now, from a psychic perspective, I lashed out energetically and spiritually at the person that had perpetrated the abuse upon me physically. And as a result, a car came off the road, crashed through a rather thick hedge, broke into the building, going through the wall, and came dead center into the middle of the room with its bumper only about 1.5 inches away from the perpetrator's face. Now, if it had not been God's will that this was what was to happen, rather a shocking event instead of, actually taking a life, because earlier in the day, you see, all the beds in the room had been lining the walls. So if, in fact, the bed had been where it originally had been, the car would have driven right over it. So instead, with the beds being rearranged with only the headboards facing against the wall, the car came plowing through, and it only pushed to the side the couple of beds that were closest to it. And, of course, his bed was on the opposite wall, and his feet were on the wall, and his head was facing into the center of the room. So when the car came in, that's when what he woke up to was a bumper. And, of course, the following next day, I got serious apologies. And basically I said, well, I want you to bring me your most gifted item or your most sacred item or that which you treasure most. And he brought me a radio, and I took the radio and I crushed it beneath my foot. And I said, now, I want you to understand what you did was wrong. And this will no longer be tolerated. You're not to do the like such, to other people from this point forward. And I want to have a vow from you that you will not continue this kind of behavior. And of course, he fell on his knees and he was crying and all this kind of good stuff. So anyway, a few months go by, and yes, more kind of weirdness going on in this supposed Christian school. And I say supposed simply because, it was the way in which things were run and everything was very abnormal, at least to me. Okay. So I graduated from there, or really, again, when things started going odd, such as me reading minds, and such as me using telekinesis and, disappearing at times and all this kind of thing, they said, no, we're not dealing with all this. And of course, they were very embarrassed by the situation that had occurred. And rather than addressing it properly and bringing the parents in and everything else and getting to the bottom things, no, they decided to sidetrack, just completely sidestep it. So I went on to another Christian school. And basically the same thing kind of sort of happened over time. Again, I was sexually abused, and then in turn the abusers, basically when came the day for them to check out, because we were all inspected by a nurse before we were released to parents, they had given each other welts on their lower backs with a belt. And rather than admitting that they were the ones that had done it to each other, they accused me of doing it instead. So as a result, they isolated me off in a room by myself, basically like a jail cell, other than the fact I had a bathroom, I had a bed, and I had a television. And I was stuck behind a wooden door, and the wooden door was the only thing that had a window in it, and the window was very small, and the window was laced with wire. So in other words, basically kind of a cage type that even if you were to attempt to break it by your fist, the glass itself would still not break out because of the wire within it. And basically at a certain time of the evening, they would open a slot in the bottom of the door, and they'd pass me a tray, and thereon would be my food. And then, of course, when I was finished, I would put the tray back through the slot on the door, and they'd come and collect it. So as a result of this, I went completely autistic. I turned inward, and I just went autistic. I said, well, if this is the way that humans are going to treat me, I really don't want to be here. And so basically I went completely silent. I would not react or speak or give any kind of emotional response whatsoever to anyone that came towards me or was in my immediate area thereafter for about 6 months. Now, on the other end of things.
How old are
Go
you
ahead.
when this is happening? How old are you at this point?
Are you there? Anyway, basically I was
Yes.
I was 8 going on 9, okay? And
Okay.
So anyway, on the other end of things, of course, now my mother has decided that she's going to remarry, and from what I was given to understand later on, that it was kind of out of necessity because, you know, they had relations and she had gotten pregnant, and so basically they married about 4 or 5 months prior to the child actually being born. Well, unfortunately, she hadn't told my then-to-be stepdad that I even existed. She had told the man, you know, that I had brothers and sisters and so forth, and that, you know, she had never, and they were, of course, adult age, you know, and so that, you know, he didn't have to have any involvement with them unless he chose to have it. And then, of course, the school calls, and just ironically, he's the one that answers the phone, and the school's saying, well, you've got this 9-year-old son, when are you going to come and pick him up? And, of course, he was absolutely dumbfounded because that information had never been given to him and so forth, and this created a lifelong animosity between the two of us. So anyway, skipping forward, because naturally, you know, I don't want to go too much more into detail because this was already covered in a previous show. So anyway, at the age of 12, I saw my first full body apparition, which was on an abandoned property that was right next door to my best friend that I'd basically grown up in school with, and I'd also studied the martial arts with, which is how I knew him very, very, very as a more than just a usual friend, but very much a best friend. Well, this property was laid next to him, and basically it was kind of an L-shaped property house, and this full body apparition of a lady in white come out from the house and sat on the porch swing and basically would swing and swing and swing back and forth. And we'd observed this a few times, and we finally got up the nerve, and I said, well, why don't we go out, you know, go around and check this little kind of like barn building that wasn't all that far away from the fence. And basically, Stephen, who was my friend, was to look out as I went around to the back side of the barn and went actually into the physical barn through the front doors. And I was inside, and there were all kinds of pictures and all kinds of all kinds of farm tools, you know, sickles and shovels and spades and all kinds of different things. And anyway, at the far end, closest to the fence, which was the far wall that was closest to the street, there were all kinds of pictures. And there was a picture there of this lady in white who was swinging on the swing. So about the time that I'm recognizing this picture, all of a sudden I get chills and all this hair standing up on my neck and my arms and everything. And I feel a hand touch my left shoulder. And I turned around, and sure enough, it's the lady in white. And I'm going, oh, my God, what am I doing? What do you do? Hello, what's your name? How you doing? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. And, of course, this is a telepathic conversation that I'm having with the spirit, okay? And she says, oh, you're the first person that's actually had the gumption basically to come and explore what I'm all about, because I haven't seen anybody in years. And she says, well, you know, And of course I'm going, well, isn't this you in the picture? And she says, oh yeah, that's me. And I said, oh, well, how long have you been gone? And she said, oh, probably about 30 years. And I said, wow, that's a long time. And about that time, I kind of started standing up and kind of just easing my way out of the situation. And, she was not alarmed. She was not, irritated in any way. Actually, she was kind of glad to see me, because she was amazed with the fact that, I'd had the courage to actually come into the property to explore, to see what information I could find about the property itself and maybe possibly even her. So anyway, that was my first full body apparition, and that happened at the age of 12. Okay? So, skipping forward a bit more, we go to the age of 14, and the age of 14 was a huge turning point in my life, because basically speaking, I had come down, I was going to go to swimming, and I was coming down the hallway, and my mom was sweeping the hallway at the time, and I was in swimming trunks and had a towel over my shoulder and, flip-flops on my feet. And I come towards her, and all of a sudden, every muscle in my body suddenly contracts, and I find myself on the floor in a fetal position. And I'm hauled away to the hospital by ambulance, and basically the doctors are thinking that I had a burst appendix, because that's how the body reacts when you get a whole lot of poison and you're injected into your system. So anyway, he did exploratory surgery after they gave me huge amounts of muscle relaxants, and my appendix was perfectly fine. And as he was doing more and more exploratory surgery, he was cutting me open a bit more and looking at all the organs, trying to figure out what was going on. A green tentacle basically wrapped around his pinky finger. And then in turn, that wasn't supposed to be there, of course. So he opened me up, and basically he found a growth about the size of a plum, and it had several other tentacles growing up inside of me, and all this kind of thing. And somewhere along the line, I died. And of course, I went up through the roof of the hospital after having observed the entire operation for the most part. Went up through the roof of the hospital into the night sky and across who knows how many, no telling how far distance it was through the night sky. And basically I went to a tunnel, and the tunnel had myriad colors swirling round and round on the walls. And I basically felt like I was magnetically pulled into this tunnel, and the tunnel had many twists and turns, and finally got to the end of it, and two angels were standing, one to each side. And the angels were very tall beings, very, very energetically light, and they had white wings and white clothes and all this good stuff. And they said, oh, we've been expecting you. And I said, oh, well, that's nice. And so I come to stand between them, and basically a cobblestone veranda appears before me. And at the far end of the veranda is a very large redwood chair, and it's got rose vines wrapped around it, and the roses are open and closing. And then all of a sudden, this white robed figure appears next to the chair. But the only thing was, where the face, the hands, and the feet should be was nothing but gold light energy. So it comes around and it sits in the chair, and all of a sudden I feel magnetically pulled towards this given individual. And as I'm getting closer to this given individual, all of a sudden they assume the form of a very, very old looking, very old, wise man with a very long white beard that's sitting down into his lap. And of course he's got big, huge hands, and his feet have appeared, and he starts to lift his hand and beckon me forward. And as he's beckoning me forward, of course, I come to the point where I'm standing basically right in front of him. So then he puts his left hand in the air, and a book appears out of nowhere, and the book is very large, and he puts the book in his lap, and he turns the book, and he opens the book and turns the pages, and each page shows the entirety of a person's life, as though it were basically a movie happening inside the pages of the book. And he turns the pages, and he comes to mine, and he looks down and he says, interesting. But unfortunately, you've got to go back. And I'm going, huh? Because you have to understand, about this time I'm feeling nothing but bliss and love and total acceptance, where I've had 14 years basically of mega rejection for the most part, and all kinds of, odd experiences and so forth, and paranormal experiences, and of course speaking to spirits and all that kind of thing. And I felt that the spirits were more congenial and more accepting than the darn human beings were. So no, I didn't want to go back. Why would I want to go back? I had no family to speak of, because there was never any connection emotionally there was no bond between me and my mom. The only thing that was with us was a psychic connection. In other words, if she ever got in trouble or had despair or anything like that. I psychically, intuitively knew about it. And of course, I grew up with a stepdad. I never met my real dad. And, my brothers and sisters, of course, are only half brothers and sisters. And of course, as soon as my younger sister was born, she was the pride of the family. And of course, I was just kind of thrown off to the side, you could say. So anyway, that's why I didn't want to go back. And God, or at least my perception of God at the time, told me, well, he's looking down and he says, well, there's a lot of things that you promised to do that you haven't accomplished yet. So you have to go back. And I said, well, I don't want to go back. And he says, well, I'm sorry. It doesn't matter what you want. The fact of the matter is you're going back. And I said, well, if that's the case, can you at least grant me one favor? And he says, what's that? And I said, well, I would really like to know truly and completely, 100%, what I really look like. And he says, okay. So he lifts his arm and the book disappears and he puts up his right hand. And again, I'm magnetically drawn back towards the entranceway of the tunnel. And the angels that were standing there now are no more than energetic balls of golden mixed light, just swirling around and round and round. Now, of course, I turn back to look, and of course, he's waving goodbye, although there's no hand that's waving instead of pure gold energy, and he vanishes, and the chair vanishes, and the veranda vanishes. And somehow, my conscious awareness was pulled out away from myself to the extent that I could look back at myself and perceive myself as I truly am. And I am nothing more than an energetic being, as are we all. Because basically, when it comes down to a spiritual aspect, that is in fact what we are. We are mortals that are energetic beings of energy and created in love and light. And that's the center of our being. And that's who we truly are. And again, down through the tunnel and down through the night sky and back into the hospital. And my dead body is laying on a gurney that's been pushed off the one side wall with a sheet over it. And the nurse is attaching a tag to my toe. And of course, I enter my body and I'm in excruciating pain. And as a normal reaction to this pain, I'm in the process of attempting to sit up and trying to figure out what is going on. And as I sit up, the nurse screams and faints. Fortunately for me, there was another nurse in the room, and she come over and pushed me down because I hadn't been so close and my guts were trying to pull out and all this kind of good garbage. And of course, she wheels me back to the center and they call the surgeon and all this good stuff. And basically, they sewed me closed and put me in recovery. And the following day, I bugged them because I wanted to see this foreign growth they had taken from me. And of course, they're all scratching their heads and saying, no, this is not possible. This man was heavily sedated. There's no way he could possibly know what we'd actually taken out of him. And I said, look, I'm not going to relent. I'll get up off this hospital bed, and I don't care if my stitch is open or not, and I'll go over to your lab, and I'll find that specimen. And they said, oh, my God, he's serious as hell. So they brought the specimen to me and showed me it. And, yes, it matched what I had seen when the surgery was going on as it was being taken out of me and all this kind of thing. And I was diagnosed and went into the medical history books as one of only 6 children up to that date that had been found with the disease of Christmas tree mesentery. Now, this is a disease that happens when you're a wee tyke and you either eat a pine kernel, a pine seed, or actually eat a pine straw that's active. In other words, not a dead one, but actually has a seed or a wick on the very base of it. And so anyway, I'd eaten one of these, and evidently instead of going out with the rest of the waste, it had attached itself to the mesentery wall, which is the last wall that basically all of the waste goes by, and the mesentery draws out all the remaining enzymes and positive things from the waste before it gets exuded. And so this basic thing had actually grown up in me. So in a scientific way, I actually had a Christmas tree growing up inside of me. And so I went to
Oh my gosh.
So anyway, so that's where basically
heart, right? It was getting to your heart, right?
Yes. Basically, the surgeon come in and saw me, and he said, "Well, I don't know how you understand or how you knew about what I'd taken out of you." And I said, "Look, Doc, I can tell you verbatim all the conversation that went on, all the comments that you made, and of course I know that you're German, and I know that basically you speak with a heavy accent, and all this kind of thing, and I can tell you what the nurses said, and I can tell you all the instruments used and everything else." And I can tell you exactly, pretty much, the moment that I died. And he said, oh, this is impossible. And I said, oh, yes, it is. Because you see, we're all connected in a lot of different ways, whether it be psychically, whether it be intellectually, whether it be mentally, whether it be emotionally, or what have you. We're all basically one big race, one big family. And I said, because of that, we can all know as much as we want to know about each other as we allow each other to know. And he says, oh no, this is no good. This is no good. And he says, now, I will tell you one thing. If I hadn't done the surgery at the time that I had done it, the longest ganglion tentacle, whatever, coming out of this root pod or whatever you want to call it, was only about 4 centimeters away from your heart. So, if in fact this surgery had not been done at the time that it had been done, and you had been left to roll around and, in your life and all the rest of it, I would say you probably have been dead in about 3 days. Because the growth would have reached around the heart and strangled it to death.
Is that called a ceratoma? When they remove something strange? Is that known as a ceratoma when they remove something foreign?
I think
like
so. I'm not a medical physician, so I'm not all that up on key on the information,
And then, according to my notes, they let you know when you're going to die.
Well,
right?
Okay.
When you
A gift from God that followed, basically. You could say, in a matter of fact, that God had a humongous sense of humor, because for the next week, while I was recuperating and all, he was showing me everything that basically would happen the rest of my life. And then come to the end of that week on the Friday, all of that knowledge just completely disappeared. And the only piece of it that was left was the day, the month, the time, and the year, and my age at which I will next expire. Now, of course, these expiration or exit points are never written in stone, and of course can always be, expanded upon or retracted or changed or whatever, I guess. So anyway, that was the only piece of information that I had afterwards.
So know that, or that you know that date and time, or has that faded?
Yes, no. That's etched into my mind. Because all of this is basically, when I speak about this, it's as though I am looking upon it as though it happened yesterday. This is all very fresh in my mind. Just like other events that, really, I would say that traumatic events, once they're released and forgiven, where you forgive yourself and you forgive anybody else that might be involved, you look upon it basically as though you have your own personal movie. Like you go in and you sit in your own theater, and the movie goes on in front of you, and you're no longer emotionally or mentally affected by the movie that you're seeing, but at the same time, you're still able to view the movie. So it's as though it's transpiring right in front of you, but now, of course, you're looking at it objectively without being actually pulled into it. So yes, I do know what that is, and basically I'm supposed to be gone by the age of 76, which right now I just turned 65, so we're talking 11 years and some odd months down in the future. Okay.
Do you think that the world as you know it will end when you die?
Well, of course, we all create our own worlds. We're all co-creators, you see, because we create every event that goes on in our lives. And then in turn, as a race, we all create mutually together everything that goes on in the world before us. And so that's why I say we're co-creators. So yes, my interpretation, or my private world, you could say, would actually cease to exist, simply because the only thing that's manifested in this body right now is my spirit, and it is my spirit that's keeping this body alive. And if my spirit exits this body, the body in fact dies, or at least ceases to function. All right, that's the big thing. It's spirit that's keeping the body alive, and not the body that's keeping the spirit alive. So basically, we are spiritual beings having a human experience, and not human beings chasing after a spiritual encounter.
Very good. So, this all happened, and you're just 14. So what happens next? I have a thing here about you started attending a psychic fair, and you did reading. So you had all these abilities, and everybody's kind of afraid of you. So what made you
yeah.
decide to go to a psychic fair?
Well, I figured that, that was a lot of people that basically all had similar gifts to me, or so I thought. And that, they were using different tools and all this kind of stuff. Some were using cards. Some were using, candles. Some were using, palmistry. Some were using, what you would call like channeled or psychic impressions and all this kind of thing. And I said, well, geez, in that big old circle of people, I should be just another common person. Now, of course, they did notate the fact that I was only 15, but at the time I looked about 17, so they weren't concerned about it. You see what I'm saying? In other words, I looked old enough at the time that I wasn't given the impression that, hello, this is the kid that needs to be supervised by his parents. No, this is a kid that's already mature enough that he can do his own thing. And so I'd set up a little booth, and I was.
What part of the world was this psychic fair?
This was in Northern California.
Where were you living?
This was in
California. Okay.
Yeah, Northern California in the county of Santa Clara. Okay, which includes San Jose, Campbell, and a great many other cities. Say again?
Excellent. We know the area, so yeah, continue. So you're at a psychic fair, and
yes.
And what happened?
Well,
anything happened there?
Yes, I went in and I was, going with setting up my booth and so forth, and I was on the main floor. Now you have to understand that there was a floor above the main floor and a basement below the main floor. In other words, this was a very big building. It was an auditorium, but it also had extensions to the building itself. And in the downstairs, everybody was selling hard goods like crystals and, all kinds of different things of that nature, on a psychic level. And then above us were basically like meetings and conference rooms where group meditations were being held and lecture tours, lectures were being given and that kind of thing. So the main floor was basically reserved for psychics and, persons of this nature, mediums, channels, all these kind of different folks that were basically there to give readings to the general public. Now, I'll come out to the main floor, which is basically at least the size of a basketball, an indoor basketball court. And there happens to be a gentleman in the farthest corner of the building, all dressed in black. And he's got an upside down pentagram hanging from his table. And he looks at me and I look at him. And it's like, the ends of a magnet. You know how the ends of a magnet, they will draw things from the outside towards them, but if you put the opposite sides of the magnet together, they repel each other. Well, this is what was going on between me and this individual. And within less than 5 minutes, he basically folded up his stuff and ran out the building. And all I can think of is that either he was a Satanist or he was, obviously someone of the dark arts. And of course, to this day, a person of negative practice or whatever cannot stand within 100 feet of me without getting major migraines or beginning to develop physical problems. But you have to understand, okay? My separation from source has never happened. I have grown up with a lifetime of understanding, knowing, and actually hearing at times advice directly from God or Goddess, okay? Because you see, I don't buy into the maelstrom of, the male-dominated society. No, in my perception, there is equality because it makes good sense to me. If we have a male and a female human being, why wouldn't we have a male and a female God and Goddess? I mean, that just makes perfect sense to me. And if, not only that, but, if you have an all-powerful being that can do anything such as create the whole of creation, maybe he wants to sit down and take a breather. And so he says to the wife, hey, dear, I've been kind of tanked out here for a bit. I just created, 50 billion universes and 80 million dimensions and, 500 gazillion galaxies and all the stupid planets that go in there and all these suns that I got permeating all over the place. And I'm just a wee bit tired at the moment, okay? So you go ahead and take my power from me, all right? And you express it as you will, because I know that you've got this little twinge and a twinkling in your eye because you're like one of the very last creations that I made, which are these human beings that live on this planet Earth. So therefore, I know that your heart is compassionate and all that kind of thing. So therefore, you can be compassionate towards the human race. Whereas I would tend to be, a little more forceful. In other words, where you would gently express to them a lesson they need to know, I might become a little more forceful and just take them by the neck and shake them up and down a few times. So you go ahead and you take the force of the power, and I will give you, of course, you're my feminine side, so therefore you use intuition, you use compassion, you use mercy, you use all of these different facets that are in the humans, in the female spirit, where naturally as the male I'm more active and more aggressive and so on and so forth. And I like to get things done as expediently as possible, whereas you're going to sit them down and take and spend a whole lot more time with them. So you go ahead and you can deal with these human beings, and we'll make one of these human beings basically God ascended eventually, just to show them a lesson as to what people can be.
Richard, we're running out of time. I want to get one more thing in before the top of the hour. Okay, so what's this? Erase a demon? What? Erase a demon? Why would you do that?
Well, yeah. Basically, I had come upon a book that basically told you how to have a pact done with the devil. So anyway, I'd taken blood, I'd written out a pact, and I was asking the devil for certain things. And of course, you light candles and you light incense and all this other kind of thing, and an actual demonic being showed up. And of course, he's about the time that he's ready to take this pact from me, a hand comes out of nowhere and says, you cannot bargain with what you don't have to give. And so anyway, as a result of that, this hand grabs a hold of the pact and pulls it directly into the candle flame, and the pact starts burning, and this demon gets this wicked look on his face, screams, hollers, and has the most god-awful smell I've ever smelled in my life, and he basically leaves the room by busting out the window.
What did he look like?
I don't know. Very close to what we perceive to be demonic looking like. In other words, kind of half animal, part human, part just with horns and kind of cleft foot feet and claws on his hands and all kind of craziness.
I wonder if you had a demonic that is a part of yourself, a part of you that had been suppressed and reached demonic proportions that needed to be dealt with too.
I would say no, Dr. Lessin, simply because I'm very, very well aware of what we hold inside as our darker nature, and I have traveled that path, and I have released everything inside me that would have been considered dark. In other words, if you were to classify me as a magician, I would have to say that I'm gray, because I have melded both my darkness and my light in order to become gray. So yes, I am very much aware of the practice of the dark arts, and yet I do not practice the dark arts. Rather, I am capable of using magic to defend myself and others against them. So basically, and then at the same time, I also know high magic and all that kind of stuff. So basically, I practice both arts, but only one is used as a means of turning it in defense against those that are trying to harm others.
I guess what I wonder is, could you make friends with the demon? Could you reach that figure in black in some way? Is it always going to be dualistic, or is there some way of becoming one?
Well, basically, yeah. In a sense, we have become one in the regards being that I have merged with what you would classify as my darker nature. In other words, my lust, my greed, everything that would be considered immoral within a normal human psyche, I have basically forgiven, merged, learned from, and absorbed within me. Which, of course, this was very foreign to me. All right, because I'm coming into this lifetime from an entirely different dimension that is so far removed from the 3D Earth that I can't even put it into terms. Okay. So yeah, I'm coming in and I'm suddenly saddled with having to deal with this human psyche when I'm purely a spiritual being with very little understanding and hardly any experience in regards to all of this that has come full circle, you see?
Wow, now I'm starting to get it. Yes, thank you.
So I have full recollection of my previous life. It was a Civil War captain, and I led a troop of troops, and unfortunately they were all ambushed. I was a doctor at the time, which is how I was made captain. I was with the Confederate Army, and basically I led my troops into an ambush, and I shot 3 times in the back while I was attempting to pick up a wounded soldier, and we both died on the spot. And I want to say this was somewhere in West Virginia. So anyway.
Wow.
And yes.
Coming up at the top of the hour, we have 1 minute. I just want to give us a little teaser. So when we come back, we're going to talk about your attempted suicide and how you were rescued. And you learned what real friendship is. And you're about 16 years of age. Uh-huh. And you have a second full body apparition. And so on and so forth. You gave me about 5 pages, 6 pages of notes. We're not going to get anywhere near to finishing that today.
We didn't make much progress today.
Pardon?
I said we didn't make a whole lot of progress today. I think it should have been kept a whole lot more short and sweet, you know?
Some things are made to enjoy rather than progress and rush through.
So we'll be back after a 4-minute break, and I thank you for coming. We'll get all your information, like your how to reach you, how to contact you. So we'll be back, and the music is starting. So please mute the mic, and we'll see you in 4 minutes.
All the other pages.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Revolution Radio, every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, on Studio B for Momentary Zen with host Zen Garcia at freedomslips.com, the People Station.
This is Thomas, a.k.a. a Mad Painter. I'd like you to join me Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Open Canvas. Don't forget to bring an open mind.
Yes, folks, that's right. Bring an open mind to an open canvas. Again, that is Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern. You oppose to government corruption. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We've got to stop them! They're going to kill us all! See how the trouble you've started?
Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You responsibly take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it. Right! You tell them I'm coming! And hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio! All right, thanks for listening while we take that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Hello?
Okay. Did I go on mute? Okay. We're back to the show. Sacred Matrix, Janet Lessin, Dr. Sash, Alex Lessin, Deborah DeFranco is our producer. And please do make your donation up there at the top on revolution.radio. Top left tab, your one-time donation, and the Patreon button is for your recurring donation. And our guest is Richard Knight. And we're coming back with part 2. Before we get back, Sasha, would you like to say something?
Well, Richard, I had a very similar experience to yours. Not as extreme, but I got to go to the library because I was answering all the questions. The other kids were starting to hate me, and so I got the Encyclopedia Britannica, and then the other encyclopedias, and that's what I read. And so, listening to you is like finding the Encyclopedia Britannica because you've got access to a lot of stuff that's just utterly fascinating to me and to probably everybody who hears you. And so I'm just thrilled. Love listening to you.
Okay, Richard, we're back to you. So at the break, you raised a demon. I don't think I'd ever do that, but you raised a demon and it went out the window. And then the next episode you attempted suicide. But I want to make sure we're complete with the demon. So did you see it again? Did it come back?
No,
did it break the window? How did it explain the broken window? Yeah.
Yes, it actually shattered the glass. It actually shattered the glass by making an extreme high-pitched noise. So basically the glass did not negatively affect it, but it flew out the glass or flew out the window, and I never saw it again. But I felt from that point on that I had kind of murkied the waters or put an air of trouble between myself and that realm of experience. Kind of like, I don't know. I guess the best simile would be like being an angel and always having to look over your shoulder because there's going to be a demon climbing out or clawing at you at some point in time at any given moment, and you never know when to expect it next. And we can get more into that because that's, again, more life experience down the road. Now, you said you wanted... Mm-hmm. So anyway, I had to replace that window, and I had to pay for it out of my own pocket. Now, of course, by that time, I was already doing work for a Presbyterian church, stripping and waxing their floors and doing other odds and ends, landscape around the property. And I was doing paper routes, and I was doing mowing lawns and all this other kind of thing in my personal neighborhood. So, yeah, I had the cash at hand to go ahead and pay for the replacement of the window. Because naturally, we're just renting a three-bedroom apartment at the time. We weren't living in our own house yet. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I don't know. This one day, this one afternoon, I come home from high school, and I'm just depressed as depressed could be. And I said, God, you told me that I had all these other things that I needed to do, And unfortunately, it took the memory from me, so I don't really know where I'm at. So I'm kind of like in this gray space, and I've just messed a demon. And so now I'm questioning, hello, how extensive are we talking? Are we talking like a hierarchy under you and a hierarchy under them? And how is it divided? And why is it that I've been chosen, to experience this? And of course, my higher self comes through and he says, well, in order to experience the whole of the reality that you stepped into, you must explore both the light and the darkness. And I said, well, that's fine, but where does it leave me? And he says, well, you'll know that in due time. And I said, well, I don't want to wait, I'm tired already, and he says, well, you got to wait. So anyway, I set about having quite what you would call a large collection of herbs, okay? And I took some henbane, and I took some hellebore, and I took some nightshade, and I took basically all of these deadly herbs, and I basically brewed them up into basically a very, very horrendous tasting tea, okay? And no matter how much sugar I put in the stuff, it just wouldn't sweeten. So I went ahead and I drank me about 2 cups, which I reckoned was probably enough to kill at least a dozen horses, okay? And I figured if it would knock out a dozen horses, it would certainly do away with the likes of me. So I was sitting in my room, and basically the herbs had kicked in, and I was becoming very lethargic and very kind of spaced out and just, couldn't move hardly at all. And basically my mom comes breaking in, and I had French doors, a pair of French doors, which, open inward and outward, depending on which way you're trying to make them go. And so she breaks into the room, and she says, Rick, you got a visitor. And I said, what are you talking about? I have a visitor. And she says, yeah, you have a visitor. And so anyway, I said, well, okay, whatever. I guess if they're here to visit, they're here to visit. So another good friend of mine from high school named Mickey come clambering into the room, and he says, look at you. You're all spread out all over the place, and you look like, you're ghost white, like a white, looking at you is like looking at a white sheet. So something's wrong with you. What have you done? And I said, well, I put together this concoction here, and I just had a sip of it, and a sip of it, and a sip of it. And I figured the more that I drank, the more merry I would become. And he says, well, what kind of ingredients did you put in there? And I said, oh, a pinch of this and a pinch of that and a pinch of this and a pinch of that. And basically, I even put some supposed herbs that are supposed to give you hallucinations as a witch that were supposedly to make witches fly through the air. And he said that was mixed in there too. And he says, well, you need to get up off your ass and start walking around. And I said, I don't want to move. And he said, I don't care if you want to move or not. You get up off your ass and we're going to move around. And of course, he took me to the kitchen, and he gave me glass after glass after glass of water. And then he walked me around, take me to the kitchen, and give me glass after glass and glass of water. Well, little did I realize at the time what he was doing is he was basically pumping my stomach, or rather filling me up with water, so that in turn the poison was diluted. And that's what saved me life. And of course, wow. I don't know that he realized it at the time, and I didn't realize it at the time, because this was hindsight, and hindsight's always 20/20. So the next episode, which happened about 6 months later, I would go out riding with my friends. We'd all get together because one of us had a car, or one of us had a certain car that we all enjoyed riding or whatever. And basically we went to the northern outskirts of San Jose. And on the northern outskirts, there's kind of a large lake that breaks down into basically what you'd call like a water system, where basically some of the water is tapered off like sort of in a dam, but the dam itself is not all that large. And from the dam, of course, there is basically a small river that eventually trickles down into basically more or less a stream. And my friends and I would like to go. We went there quite often, and we'd have parties and picnic and so forth, because it was way away from everybody. In other words, the closest house was probably maybe 3 or 4 miles away, and it was out in nature, and we would like to go out and hang out there around 2 or 3 in the morning. So on this one evening, okay, they were all sitting around smoking, because we all smoked cigarettes, because I began smoking cigarettes around 17. And I smoked Marlboros, of course. That was the in thing then. That was how to be hip, how to hang with the crowd, So anyway, I strode off by myself, And my friends are all sitting around the table and sitting around the car and drinking and smoking and, living it up or whatever. And I go strolling off by myself, and I'm following the stream up a ways, and I'm getting probably, I don't know, probably a half a mile away from where my friends were. So basically, they had more or less forgotten about me because naturally I wasn't there to see or hang with or anything. And I was out on my own, and all of a sudden I hear this woman's voice saying, "Child, child, my baby, where are you? Child, child, my baby, where are you?" And of course, I'm trying to determine from which area or what distance or what direction this sound is coming from. And all of a sudden, probably maybe about a dozen feet in front of me, this woman, again dressed in white. What it is with me with women and dressed in white, I don't know. But anyway, she appears out of nowhere, full body apparition. She looks, probably dressed, I would say, probably in maybe the 30s or 40s attire, okay, with the hat on and the whole 9 yards, and this big immense purse and all this kind of stuff. And she's going up and down the stream, and she's crossing the stream and looking the other side, and then she's coming back over to where I am, and she's going up and down the stream. And she continues to call out, my child, where are you? My child, where are you?" And I'm saying to myself, well, okay, let's reach out mentally and see if we can reach her. And so I reached out mentally to her, and she says, "Oh, you can see me." And I said, "Yes, I can see you, and I perceive who you are, and I perceive what you're doing, and I understand that you're looking for a child." And she says, "Yes, I think that as I crossed the stream, or perhaps even a portion of the river earlier today, that the child jumped from the arms, and the child's only about maybe a year and a half old, and she got swallowed in the water, and the water just took her away." And I said, "Oh my gosh, that's terrible." And she says, "That's why I'm looking for my child." And I said, "Well, unfortunately, I haven't seen your child." And she says, "Well, that's okay. I'm still going to keep looking." And so basically that's what she did. She just kept looking. She kept going through the stream and to the other side of the bank and calling out and looking, and then come back to my side and was doing the same thing over and over again. Now, this perplexed me because, you see, if there hadn't been an intelligent response to my inquiry, I would have just shined it on and said, well, okay, it's just residual energy of some past trauma where a lady, had found that their baby was drowned or had seen their baby drown in the water or something to that extent, and basically they were doing nothing more than repeating the same acts that they had come upon at that time. You see what I'm saying? In other words, residual energy does not have consciousness, so therefore it doesn't acknowledge you as a physical being, as being there. It doesn't acknowledge your presence whatsoever. And that's residual energy, and that's how you tell the difference between a spirit and residual energy. A spirit, of course, is going to acknowledge you and actually converse with you, knowing that you're physically there in their presence, and then will explain to you why they're there or what it is they're set out to do or what it is they're trying to accomplish, etc., etc., etc. So this left me at a quandary because in the 1 minute she appeared to be intelligent, and yet at the next minute she appeared to be residual energy. So I couldn't relate. It just kind of dumbfounded me. So eventually I strode off and I went back and I found my friends, and of course they were all partying, and I eventually said, well, did I really encounter this, or was this just a figment of my imagination? So eventually the following day I went to the local library, all right, and I looked up historical events going back on microfiche as far as I could go, and around the 30s or thereabouts, it had an article about a lady that had lost her baby at that precise spot. So what I encountered was actually a part of history. And I'm going, oh, now isn't that a trip and a half?
Wow. And that's interesting how it kind of resembles what happened with your own mother.
Yeah, exactly. And
how she drowned you.
I'm glad you brought that up, because basically until this moment I hadn't actually even made any affinity with that or even drawn, hindsight or parallel conclusion on that at all. But yes, it is very true. Of course, the difference was that I was thrown into the ocean, which of course you're most likely to drown more easily in the ocean than you would be in a stream. But just the same, considering the size of the infant and the amount of water present, and if they had been dropped upstream where it was more of a river than a stream, then yeah, she could have easily drowned. And I got the impression that it was a female infant. I was never told, of course, by the lady that she never described whether it was a baby boy or a baby girl. I just had the impression it was a baby girl. And the article confirmed that it was a baby girl.
Yeah, and the woman in white, it's so interesting that your mother has a loving side and another side, and they're both there.
That's true too. Yeah, because my mom was Irish heritage, and the man that she married was Scotch Canadian. So the Scotch and the Irish do get along to a certain extent, and then they have tiffs. And of course, the Canadians are always looked as being Englanders, and of course, the English and the Irish, or the English and the Scotch, sometimes often have tiffs because they don't agree, or they agree to disagree.
So you've gone through your life, and you're coming up on 17, and you've never really felt love. I'm amazed you made it through, right? Because you said at one point
you had pals who really.
You had friends,
really
I guess.
Hard connection with your buddies.
But I guess what we're coming up in the notes I have here, you are having your first love, and you're moving away from the family and having lots of experimental times in your life. Go ahead for the next phase. We don't even have you grown up yet. You're still a kid.
Well, I don't know. In my eyes, I already felt 40 years out. I'd been schooled so rapidly in such a condensed form that I felt like the hell. I was a 40-year-old, and I could have very vivid conversations and very intellectual conversations with all my friends that were, at least 40, 50, 60 years old. Even though I was only 17 at the time.
Childhood, that's what I want to say. You didn't get to play much. You had a lot of stuff. Anyway, so here you're 17, and you gave me a lot of notes, so I don't want to give it away.
Yep.
What happened at 17?
All right. Well, anyway, this was basically, was when in my life I realized that I was gay. And, of course, I went and confided to my mom, and my mom looked at me and she says, I've known that for years. You're not telling me nothing new. And your older brother was gay, and then he turned bi, and I expect that somewhere along in your life you'll probably have a bi experience. But for the most part, you're probably going to be gay. But I'm hoping for the other. So, if you want to bring a young lady home from high school, that's perfectly fine with me. You can just bring her into your room and be sequestered for the night, and we won't ask you no questions. And I said, okay, Mom, if that ever happens. So, and actually it did happen around this same year. There were so many incidences that happened while I was 17. It's just, you could write a book just from that 1 year alone almost. Okay. Of course, I had experimented with drugs. I had smoked marijuana. I had tried LSD. I had tried magic mushrooms, and all of these things. However, I always had a different perspective or take from it, from the aspect being that instead of taking the drug and saying, well, I'll experience whatever the drug shows me, I was always from an aspect that I wanted to be in full control. In other words, okay, drug, I know that you're in me, and I know that this has gone through my system and so on and so forth, because I can feel you changing me. And just understand that whatever you show me, regardless of what it is, I'm still the one in control. And I think this was a very mature way of looking at drugs and interacting with them. So, sort of like a scientist, more or less, interacting with drugs rather than just a regular kid saying, oh, yeah, let's get high and, be carefree about it and so on and so forth. Anyway, so I gained a lot of conscious control on a lot of different aspects in a lot of different perspectives. I had flashes of a lot of different past lives and experiences therein. I had joined and taken on an internship with one of the best private detective agencies in the state of California. And the internship was to last 2 years, and I would be, trained in all the various detective angles of how to, surveil somebody and watch them and follow their movements and interrogate them and question them and so forth, and how to get people to admit things that were, truthfully they had done without trying to entrap them and so forth. So anyway, that internship was 2 years, and I was guaranteed at the end of 2 years I would be in business for myself, because my mentor was going to set me up in my own business as a licensed private investigator. And then in turn, while all this is going on, I'm working as a security officer for a steel manufacturing plant, okay? And I come out one afternoon, and I'm standing by the bus depot, or the bus station stop, rather, and waiting for the bus to arrive so it can take me on home to basically the Job Corps, because I had left home at 17 and gone directly to the Job Corps because I dropped out of high school. I never intended to graduate high school. I just said, well, what's the big deal? So you have a high school diploma. What does it say? What does it do for you? Because by then, the hiring factor was not as prominent. I mean, yes, the drive had always been, well, you have to be educated and you have to have experience, and then we'll hire you. And I'm saying, well, I'm a kid, so I've already got tons of experience, but the experience that I have, you probably won't understand. And the little experience that I do have, like working for the church and mowing lawns and that kind of thing, really doesn't translate a whole lot into the business world. So I just figured, well, I'm an insatiably curious individual. So what would be the foremost area of life that I would want to explore? Well, of course, investigations. And I was already doing paranormal investigations without even realizing that's what I was doing. So I said, okay, so let's get into the civil and criminal end of things, and that's what I was beginning. So anyway, I was standing at the bus stop, and this very interesting and exotic-looking individual pulls up in his car, and he says, well, why don't you hop in and we go for a ride? And I said, okay. And eventually, over time, we became lovers, and without going into all the weird details, because there was a whole bunch of weird details involved in that, because he was Buddhist. And anyway, we were sitting around watching one of the old monster movies one afternoon, watching it on the television. He was on a couch and I was in a reclining chair. And we had a Buddhist shrine in the living room, okay? Now, this shrine basically included a statue of Buddha, and there was a candle holder that the votive candles were burned in. And they were always kept burning because that was like a commitment of energy and a commitment of honor and respect towards Buddha. And he was Buddhist, so basically he always kept the candle burning. Well, about 2/3 of the way through this movie, he suddenly gets a glossy-eyed look in his face, and he says, that's neat. And as he says, that's neat, he stands up and he crosses the room to the Buddha shrine, and he picks up the candle that's lit with a flame in it, mind you, and he drinks the hot wax into his mouth and tosses the glass that had the candle in it into the fireplace, which was directly under this shrine, because there was a fireplace in the house as well. So anyway, I'm sitting there completely dumbfounded and amazed, and I'm saying, oh my God, did I just see what I just saw? And I'm thinking to myself, this is just not right. So naturally, he kind of swoons, and I pick him up and carry him in my arms, and I lay him across the bed. And, I'm immediately getting cool water because I want this wax to be cooled, and I'm attempting my very best to physically scrape this wax out of his mouth and around from his tongue and so forth to make certain that his airway's not blocked. And the next thing I know, he starts speaking ancient Latin, and he's cursing at me. And he's saying that, yes, you may serve our overall master, but you don't have a life that you should have. You should join me and be free. And you should join me now, and we could have a dance together throughout the rest of eternity. And I'm going, holy crap in hell, what the heck? This just isn't making no sense. And then he takes on to cussing me, and he starts changing languages, and he starts going from Latin to Greek, and Greek to Roman, and Hebrew, and all these different languages. And I knew for a fact the man only spoke English and Spanish, so there was no way in the devil that he knew all these other languages. And this went on for quite some time, and I finally determined to myself, well, obviously he must be possessed. So, having been trained, okay, on a spiritual level, okay, not on a physical level, because I hadn't gone into the ordination of things in that yet, but on a spiritual level, I pulled down the knowledge of exorcism. And basically, I went and I got a Bible, and I read certain phrases out of the Bible, and basically I commanded the entity that was possessing him to speak to me. And he came forward, and as he came forward, Stephen's face contorted, and it became more elongated and more accentuated in various ways, and his eyes changed from what they had been to pure black. And he says, who are you to address me? You think you're someone. Who are you to address me? I reside in a realm that you have no understanding of and you have no control over, and eventually we will take over your life and we will take over all of your realm. And I said, well, you may think that, but I don't see that happening, dude. And I said, in the name of Jesus Christ, I now command and take control of thee, and I expel thee from the physical being that thou now art housed in. And he says, who are you to command me? And I said, it is not I that commands you. It is I and my Father who command you, and we command you now. And yes, basically, Stephen at that time basically completely, his face went back to normal. He completely quit speaking, and he completely went to sleep. Okay? And so I wasn't finished, though. I knew that this entity, whatever it was, demon or otherwise, was still there somewhere in the house. Okay? So I was drawn to the basement, all right? And unbeknownst to me, in the basement of this home, a black magician had created what you would call a black portal, okay? In other words, an opening in the wall or an opening in reality or dimension-wise that basically allows dark spirits to enter from their realm into our realm. And, of course, I recognized this because it was seething. The energy was so dark and so heavy, it was just seething and seething and seething, okay? And it just felt like, I don't even know how to put it into words. You didn't want to be there. You just, if you were there, it felt like something was sucking all the energy from you, like something was trying to suck the very life from you. So anyway, I said, okay, so I went up back upstairs, and I got me some water, and I put some salt in it, and I blessed it, and I come back down, and I threw it on the wall. And as I did, the wall began steaming. And all of a sudden, it was like this gray ooze come out of the wall itself. And as it did, it come down to the center of the wall, and then all of a sudden, it went swirling around in a circle, and then got sucked into the wall. And as soon as that happened, the air in the room completely changed. Like the energy was completely remade, like the portal had never existed at all. And then all of a sudden, I hear this loud screaming going on upstairs. And I'm going, what the devil? So naturally, I race back upstairs to the living room where Stephen was asleep, and now he's sitting up in the bed, and he's looking at me with these dark eyes, and he's saying, why did you do this? Why did you close my entryway? Why did you close my entryway? And I'm saying, well, your entryway needed to be closed because it shouldn't have been there in the first place. And he says, you had no right to do this. You had no right to do this. And I said, well, there may be a lot of things that I do that you don't consider I have a right to do, but I bind thee and I bind thee now. I bind thee into the furnaces of hell. I bind thee into the summation world of the demons and the devil's hierarchy of which you belong. And I command thee now to come forth now out of this body and dispossess this one that I love. And he says, no, I won't do this. And so I said, okay, fine. And I walked out and I went back down to the basement because I wanted to check things out, okay? And like I said, the atmosphere had completely changed. The wall even had changed color. And so I figured that work had been completed and it was finalized or whatever. Stephen, in the interim, comes through the kitchen and comes through the hallway and goes down into the basement, down the wooden steps, which is basically comes down at an arc and turns at a sharp angle and then goes further down into the basement itself. And right there on the wall is a crest holding a pair of fencing swords, okay? And so I'm coming up and I'm grabbing him and I'm embracing him and, I'm saying, are you all right? Are you all right? Are you all right? And, of course, he says, no, I'm not all right. And he grabs a fencing sword off the wall and he breaks the tip off of it. And he points the sword towards my heart. And I'm saying, well, okay, all right, this is the way you want to play. I'll help you understand who it is you're playing with. And he says, oh, I know all about you. We have gone round and round many times, in many lives, in many places, in many dimensions, and you are yet to cross me fully. And I said, oh, I saw one of your henchmen back a little while ago when I had written a pact out of my mistaken stupidity. And, of course, God told me that that was not my right to give away my spirit because my spirit belongs to God and not to me, and that I'm just a child of the fatherhood. And he says, well, that may be so, but your God is not with you now. And I said, oh, but you don't understand. He certainly is, because wherever love is, that is where God exists. And basically my eyes started changing. I don't know how they were changing, but they were changing. And it was like beams of light started coming out of my eyes, okay, and they were going into his eyes. And basically I said, Stephen, if you have any love for me at all, you will not run me through with this sword. And as soon as I spoke it, he dropped the sword and fainted. And so I carried him up in my arms, grabbed him up in my arms and carried him up to the bedroom again. And I presumed at that point in time, the exorcism had finished. All right. There was no longer any contortion. There was no longer speaking in foreign languages. There was no longer any attack towards me or on me in any way. And he was completely 100% himself and completely at rest. Okay. So I said, well, all right. I have checked the insides of the house. Now let me check the outsides of the house. My spirit's saying, look, your inside perimeter has now been sealed. It has been warded. No dark entities can enter ever again herein. And I'm saying, that's cool. And, and I'm getting the impression as I go outside, St. Michael is standing there with his sword upright. It's a flaming yellow, gold, blue all at the same time. And he's standing in the middle of in the very small backyard that we had. And he said, yes, you have defeated whatever that was that came towards you. And know this, that I should always be with you, for you and I are brothers. And I said, cool. And of course, because hey, I'm a kid, I'm a teenager, and I'm taking all this in and I'm going, okay, am I in the middle of something that, is a horror movie that someone just wrote or what, So anyway, I go out into the garage. All right. Now, I should have already told you, but about a year, maybe a year and a half prior to this, all right, because you have to understand that our relationship at this point had come up to almost 3 years, at least 2 years and 8 or 10 months, somewhere in there. And after about the first year that I was with him, a solid black cat, a real small kitten, basically had appeared on our front porch, and she had a white star on her chest. And so, I named her, and I took her in, and I nursed her, and I gave her milk, and she and I were companions for the next couple of years that occurred. And of course, the more that I fed her, the larger she became in size. So anyway, I went out to the garage, okay, which was basically more or less a carport that was very, very solid in structure. And we had shelves up in there, and of course you could park the car in there and work on the car if you needed to, or, do other things. And there were also abandoned pieces of furniture out there. And one of the pieces of furniture was a high-back chair. And, one of these overstuffed high-back ones from back in the 40s or 50s, somewhere in there. And unfortunately, at the top of this, laying outwardly half across it, on the top of this high-back chair, was me cat. And the cat looked like she had the most horrendous look of fear and rage on her face at the same time. And all her claws and all her paws were extended as far out as they could possibly be. And unfortunately, she was stiff as a board. So I deduced that whatever it was that I had exorcised from Stephen naturally fled, and then in turn went into the body of whatever the next live being that it came in contact with, which in this case, it was a cat. And the cat, rather than allowing the demon to escape it, decided to die, give up its own life, so that in turn, that negative spirit would have to go back to the place that it had come from, because it had nowhere else to turn.
Okay, we got a lot of questions right here.
I know you do.
I know that Deborah wants to. Deborah, I know you've been waiting patiently. Are you there? Are you ready for your questions? Or comments? Deborah, can you hear us? She may have stepped away. What about you? Do you have a comment or question? Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. Richard, are you familiar with the Tuatha De Danann?
Say it again.
Are you familiar with the Tuatha De Danann?
Yes, the Tuatha De Danann.
Yes, do you have a genetic, because of your Gaelic background, obviously, is there a genetic link between you and the Tuatha De Danann?
Yes, there is.
Ah, can you elaborate?
Well, okay. On a more political scale, you could say, I'm the last living cousin of Brian de Boru, the last High King of Ireland. And it is that bloodline that basically goes back as hereditary unto the Tuatha De Danann through come on, get the information. Come on, pull it forward. I'm talking to myself. Sorry about that. Anyway, I'm resourcing my library. Okay. Anyway, Cahulan, all right, who was basically the son of one of the pair of the Tuatha De Danann.
Right.
Basically, he was a hero, and he was granted a spear that he could throw, and it would pierce the bodies of his enemies and then return to his hand. Well, Cahulan, of course, had children, and basically they began the line of Brian's lineage, and that's how I'm connected to the Tuatha De Danann.
So, for the audience who isn't familiar with what that is, they are descendants of the Anunnaki. So that's why I asked the question, because your skills are such a high level. I couldn't, with your Gaelic background, there was no way possible that you weren't related, which is why I asked the question. Passing the talking stick.
Okay. Well, I feel bad for the kitty that she sacrificed her life for you. What happened after that?
All right. Well,
when he came back to, was he aware? Was your partner aware of anything?
No, he had no memory whatsoever.
No memory.
No memory whatsoever. And about 3 days later, he started having the glossy look again. And basically, he took a chair from the dining room table, which we had a 12-seated table, and they were very expensive wooden chairs. And there also happened to be a very large framed glass window that went from floor to ceiling. Okay, that was directly out next to the dining room chairs and all that, and the dining room table. And he took one of the chairs and he threw it through the window. And so this was such a violent act and so out of character of him. I'm saying, oh my God, is this round two or what? So basically, I pinned him to the floor. And fortunately for me, his brother and his family lived next door to us, and he came racing over to see what all the noise was about and everything else. And of course, he comes in through the living room and into the dining area, and of course, he sees that the chair's gone crashing out the window. And he says, what in the devil's going on? And then, of course, he looks down and realizes that I've got his older brother pinned to the floor. And I said, look, I ain't got the time nor the energy to explain all this to you. And besides, if I did, chances are you probably wouldn't understand it at all. So I would just say this. I think your brother has smoked some bad hash, and I think he's reacting this negatively, and that's why I have him pinned to the floor, because I don't want him hurting himself or me. And he says, no problem. So he takes my place and pins him to the floor, and then basically picks him up and carries him out and over to his own personal residence. So I, in the interim, pack up all my bags, and I said, okay, it is time for me to leave. Okay?
Wow.
And so I go out the front door, and I said, well, okay, I'm going to become a nomad, all right? I'm going to continue my internship with the detective agency, and I'm going to start interacting more so with a group of people that would meet every Saturday in the music room, or the where music was taught at San Jose Community College, and we called it the Temple of the Stars. And all of these people walked a different path of life and had worked a different tradition and everything else, and we would have guest speakers that would present different topics of discussion to us for about 6 to 8 hours every Saturday. And then at the end, of course, we'd hold hands and have a grand prayer amongst us all. And then we would disband, and a good dozen or so of us would go over to a coffee house, and we'd sit around and have coffee, and some of us would eat, and we'd have a grand discussion as to what we had just been taught, what we had just learned, and what our take was on it. And this began going on for at least 3 or 4 months. And all of a sudden, a Native American showed up in the midst of us, and he says, I've been watching you. And I said, okay, is that a good thing? Are you stalking me or what the hell? And he says, no, I'm not stalking you, but I think you need to come to our center and be tested. And I said, what do you mean? And he says, well, you'll understand better when we get there. So he brings me out to his car, and we go to his car, and on our way we go to Stanford Research Center. Now, Stanford Research Center was basically an applied science center that was there conducting studies of the psychically gifted and the spiritually aware and all of these kind of folks, regardless of their age. And in addition to that, the government was funding them probably about 85% of the way, buying their instruments of measurement and all this kind of things, such as EKGs and various other sundry items. And anyway, he said that, look, I want to introduce you to a couple of the professors and a couple of the scientists, because I think that, you would fit in here with the program and you'd be an interesting person to study. And I said, now, wait a minute here. I ain't going to be nobody's guinea pig. And he says, oh, no, you're not a guinea pig. Matter of fact, we'll even pay you a bit here and there for it. And I said, oh, money's involved. Well, that's interesting. So anyway, I went ahead and I became involved. And, of course, I was certified as being able to levitate items, and I was being certified as having telekinesis, and I was being certified to read minds, or had the ability to read minds, and to project thoughts, and to create fire in the palm of my hands, and all of these different kind of things, and all went into scientific notification, all tested under scientific circumstance and everything else. And so I became a certified psychic in probably roughly speaking, about 3 months. Okay? It didn't happen overnight. And the sessions were going on at least 4 or 5 times a week. And I was just it almost got to the point that was my second home. Not that I really had a home, because I was just hanging out at a small efficiency apartment at that time. And I was being very discreet and everything else, because I was, still learning to be an investigator. And at the same time, I was being studied. All right. And then one afternoon, I was at the Temple of the Stars. And of course, I think it was vampires, and I do believe it was psychic healers, the ones that reside on a specific island that have been scientifically measured, where basically the person that's got illnesses or whatever, they lay on a table in front of them and they pass their hands over them, and then basically wherever they determine that the tumor is, or whatever the growth is, or whatever it is that's going on in their body that's not supposed to be there, they wave their hand across and the body opens, and they reach in and they take it out, whatever it happens to be, and they put it on a plate or in a pan or whatever, and then basically they wave their hand back across, and it is as though as they've never been opened. And so we had films of this. Okay, we didn't actually have one of the healers available, but we had probably a couple hours session of films of all these different procedures going on. And of course, then in turn, we did round robin questions amongst the group, as to whether this was real or whether it was contracted. And then, of course, there was a couple of journalists that had come in that were the ones that had brought us the films. And they said that actually they had been there in person, and knew for a fact that these practices were real. So anyway, that was all interesting. And then here comes my friend that is my mentor at Stanford, okay? And he says, look, you got to break aside from this, and I need for you to come with me, and so we can get away and we can go have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, whatever you happen to like. And so we went to Denny's and we had, a cup of coffee, and we were sitting down, and he says, I want you to understand that you need to disappear. And I'm saying, huh? And he says, yeah, look, I brought you $500, and I want you to disappear, because if you keep coming out to the program, the government comes through about every 4 months, and you've been there 3 months, which means the government's going to show up next month. And if you're there, they're going to snatch you. And I said, what do you mean snatch me? And they said the government comes through and takes all the best gifted ones that have been documented as being verified as real and not fake and possessing extreme gifts. They take them off and they subdue them and present them into various government projects that nobody can talk about. And we refer to them as the Men in Black, because they're government agents of God only knows what agency, but they always appear dressed in black suits with black overcoats and black ties and black glasses and black hats. And they come out and they go through the lineage, the long line of the people being studied, or they'll go through the doctor's offices, and they'll pull up all how the doctors present to them all the various files, which include pictures of the given individuals. And they'll say, okay, well, you bring in these so-and-sos, and you have them here on Tuesday, or you have them here on Wednesday, or whatever. And then they show up on Tuesday or Wednesday, and they pick these people up, and they're never heard from again. And he says, I don't want this to happen.
I had a friend disappear. I was talking to him when I first moved to Hawaii moved to Maui in the late 90s, and he said they were after him. So I knew where you were going with this. Yep. But do you know what happens? No, you don't know anything about what happens to him. Yeah, he disappeared too. So this is like a warning to everybody. You're very psychic.
Well, yeah, okay. Well, I mean, of course, a lot of the information that was going on right now, or right then, back in, because, I mean, this was in the 70s, of course, there was a race between us and Russia to create what you would call a scientifically controlled psychic program of remote viewing, telekinesis, teleportation, and all of these kind of things. And basically, it was under wraps, and of course, it was sequestered away, and God only knows who knows where, all right? And basically, the individuals were called upon to do remote viewing and actually appear in what were meetings that were going on that were very hush-hush in certain places. And, of course, they would sit etherically in the meeting, and therefore they would understand and hear everything that was going on, because they in spirit form, we can understand every language. There is no barrier as to language in regards to spirit, all right? So if you're in spirit form and you're listening in on a conversation, even though they're speaking Russian or they're speaking Italian or whatever language it is they're speaking, intuitively and psychically and spiritually, you automatically understand what is being spoken. And so the individuals that were exceedingly gifted, of course, were allowed or basically commanded to remote view in these meetings and so forth, in the hopes of gaining what would be classified as top secret information from the other side. And all of this has come out in a series of documentaries and so on and so forth, which, of course, I mean, there's always a 50-year silence gap. In other words, you can't talk about anything that's going on with the government without allowing at least 50 years to transpire between the time of the event and the present day moment. So anyway, that's what the programs were all about. And yeah, I mean, these people were taken away from their families. Some of them were 12 years old, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds. And they always looked for the ones that seemed to have the least connection to their families. So that way there wouldn't be anyone left around to make a stink, you see. So
okay, so all this happened, and you're only 18 at this point. You have a long life. You've lived 100 lives in one. Okay, so you escaped this, and so you got $500. Yep. What happens? Where do you go next?
All right. Well, I'm nearing the completion of my internship, and my teacher is really, really, really very impressed with me, and he says, heck, I may even let you graduate a few months early because you just are impressing the devil out of me. So he reaches out to his contacts, and the next thing I know, I have a state license as an investigator, I have a federal license as an investigator, and I have a county license as an investigator. And I'm saying, well, I'm very thankful for all this. And he says, oh, by the way, if you go out to the room in the back, you can choose any of the equipment that you need from out there. We have video cameras, and we have listening devices, and we have binoculars, and we have binoculars that take pictures, and we have infrared cameras, and we have all this kind of thing. And so I went out to that room, and after, of course, he was showing me around and telling me all about it, I got me a trunk load full. Okay? And I said, well, okay, now I'm ready. I'm all juiced up, and I'm really ready to hit the road or hit the streets and become Johnny Quest or Johnny whoever, And so that was where I was at with that. So then I went ahead and I kept going to Temple in the Stars, because naturally I was fascinated by all that, because I was learning all kinds of stuff. Now, granted, you have to understand, by the age of 10, I had read every book I could possibly lay my hands on that had either an occult, a metaphysical, a parapsychological, or any kind of magic or any kind of thing of that nature that I could lay my hands on and get for myself. I was latching hands on and reading them. Okay. And of course, there were several works done by Alice Bailey, in regards to the White Brotherhood. And of course, the impression was given that, everybody goes to the heaven of their own imagining once they die. And actually, I kind of tend to agree with that to a certain extent, because just like anything else, we co-create our world here that we interact with in the global world of the earth while we're here. Then why in the heck, once we've decided in passage or in our understanding and belief, just as I had when I was 14, I went and looked upon the face of God, or what I believed to be the face of God, or what God would look like. Well, of course, later in life, you start to describe to yourself what heaven's supposed to be, and that's the place you end up at when you pass on. So anyway, so I started launching investigations, mainly for missing persons and this kind of thing. I got involved with a lot of movie stars, and I went across country, and I rescued some of their children from cults and different drug binges and things of this nature. And of course, I can't, and I will not, of course, disclose clients, because naturally that's sealed. That's as sacrosanct as far as an investigator and his client as you would say a lawyer and his client, or a doctor and their client. Same thing is observed in a court of law. So anyway, so I was doing investigations and all this kind of thing, and of course I was doing the Temple of the Stars. Well, I decided that just to break free from it all, I would go ahead and join the California Army National Guard, because I wanted to be a military policeman. So I went in and I signed up and everything else, and that ended very abruptly within 6 months, because the one that was teaching us hand-to-hand combat was a sadistic SOB, and so basically he had the whole company around in a circle one afternoon in basically like a basketball room or whatever, and he was basically putting on demonstrations on various people that he would call upon out of the crowd, and he would demonstrate like how to break a person's arm, and the person would be on their knees and they'd be crying, and he would only be like a microsecond away from breaking that person's arm. Now you have to also consider, all right, by the age of 18, I am now fully accomplished and have 3 black belts in the martial arts, okay? And I've been in competitions, and I was considered the 3rd highest black belt in the state of California. So that's how masterful I was in the techniques of karate and a number of other arts. So anyway, when he come to me, he couldn't lay hands on me, and he couldn't lay hands on me. And the more he couldn't lay hands on me, the more pissed he got. And the more pissed he got, then the more aggressive he became. And then finally it turned to anger. And when he turned and lashed out in anger, I, of course, laid hands on him and put him down and basically took him out. Or in other words, I removed his consciousness. I knocked him out in one punch. And of course, this was before the whole company. So then in turn, the captain, he went to the captain, because he was a master sergeant, had been there with the company for, who knows, 20 years or something. And the captain had been there maybe 10 years or something like that. And so they were going to give me hell, and they were going to, give me a dishonorable discharge and all this kind of noise. Well, fortunately for me, unbeknownst to them, they didn't know that I had an uncle who was over the entire California Army National Guard, and who sat in his headquarters as a 4-star general. Okay? And so I dropped a dime and I said, Uncle, I'm having a really bad experience down here, and all I want is really just an honorable discharge and just walk away from all this. Do you think maybe you could arrange this? And he says, no problem, bucko, and I'll be down there, I don't know, say in about 9 days. And I said, okay. So for the next 9 days, the captain and his master sergeant were giving me all kinds of hell, and they were telling me how they were going to make my life a living hell and do all this kind of garbage to me. And, and I'm saying, hello, I'm only a private. What can you possibly do to me? Oh, well, we can make your life a living hell. Da, 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 da. And I said, no, you can only do what you think you can do. I have to be the one that allows it to happen in order to experience whatever negativity you're projecting towards me. And he says, well, we're just going to do this and we're just going to do that. And I said, well, we'll see. So anyway, the 9th day comes along, and all of a sudden, a couple of cars pull up, black limos, all right? And of course, they're being escorted by a Jeep full of MPs, and they're being escorted behind them by a couple of cars full of federal agents, all right? And of course, their escorts stay inside because naturally now they're on a military compound. So they're basically I mean, of course it is the Army National Guard, so it's kind of one of them wigwam things where, yes, they're kind of federal employees, but they're not. They're state employees. And yes, they're called Army, but they're really not. They're Army in style, but they're actually National Guard, so they're really under control of the state. So anyway, yeah, I found that out over time because regardless of the service that you put in with them, it's never recognized as federal service, even though they'll try and convince you that that's not true at all. So anyway, out comes a major from one of the limos, and out the next one out the car is Lieutenant Colonel, and the next one out the car is a Colonel. And then he goes to the next limo down, and he opens the door, and out comes a 2-star general, and out from behind him comes my uncle, the 4-star. And they all, the military police, of course, set up guard, a perimeter around them, and they escort them into the compound and into the offices where the captain and the officers of that command unit actually reside, okay? And so basically, they all come in, and of course, the master sergeant who's been bending the captain's ear all day and all night, trying to conceive every possible way to get at me or whatever, is in the room with him, and he hears a slight knock on the door, and he goes to answer the door, and it's a major at the door. So naturally, he snaps to attention and says, "Commanding officer on deck." And of course, the captain glances up and sees it's a major, so he gets out of his desk and snaps to attention. And the major comes into the room and he says, "Well, I understand that there's been a wee bit of a difference of agreement here. And so I personally, and those that would follow me, are all coming in here now to make basically a ratified situation once and for all." And so he steps to the far west end of the room, okay? And in comes the Lieutenant Colonel. And he says, "Well, the major's pretty much hit the nail on the head, and that's what we're here for." And he steps off and joins the major, okay? Then the full bird comes in, and he says, "Well, the one before..." Do what?
We're
Say
running
what?
out of time. Oh, my God.
Well,
We're running out of time.
anyway, I'm sorry. Well, anyways, that situation ended with me getting an honorable discharge. The captain was busted to a private. The master sergeant was expelled with a dishonorable discharge.